let's talk some Steelers running backs. Over the weekend, Nick Wright of First Things First just had one awful opinion on the Pittsburgh Steelers running back situation, saying, quote, "The Steelers do not have good weapons. I think Najee is below average flatly," which is just who uses the word flatly? Weird. I think Jaylen Warren, every team's got a Jaylen Warren, a guy who, if you can get 6 carries a game, looks dynamic. If you are in today's game, do you not? And if you are in today's game and do not have a Jaylen Warren, what are you doing? They're wide receivers. They have that is talented. A total of, this guy doesn't make any sense, and he speaks. Quote, "They're wide receivers. They have that is talented, is total male content. In that, do they have the worst weapons? Obviously." First off, wherever I'm reading this quote from, I don't think transcribed it correctly, so my apologies there. Second, I mean, is that possibly, it's half right. The Steelers don't have a good wide receivers core. I think we've talked about that plenty this offseason, and I think that's the biggest topic of conversation right now is how do you add to that and give Russell Wilson and Justin Fields some weapons before the season starts, but we have ideas of how that's going to happen. When it comes to the running back, I mean, that's going to be the Steelers' offense. Is Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren ground and pound football with Arthur Smith running the show? Apparently, they're not very good. Your thoughts? You had some interesting ones before we jumped on here, so I figured it's time to let you kind of voice your opinion.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, I don't think he's wrong that they don't have great wide receivers. I don't think that's debatable, but I also think that's something the Steelers know and that they have. I don't know, there's at least a path to improving them. There's a plan to improve them. It's probably going to be through the NFL draft. So like I can't, really fault him there. I don't know if George Pickens is a malcontent. I think that's who he was referring to, but that's a different issue. He also doesn't mention Pat Freiermuth at all, which I think is, a mistake. He's part of the receiving core. But yeah, I took the biggest issue with what he said about the running backs. And I mean, like, I think he's wrong about Najee Harris. Like, to say he's average, I mean, this is a guy who's rushed for 3,000 yards, more than 3,000 yards over the past 3 seasons. He's gotten even stronger as his year has gone on. Despite all the usage, he had arguably the best season of his career last year, while he was splitting carries with Jaylen Warren, who that's what I really got annoyed about was that the idea that every team has a Jaylen Warren, has a guy who can take 6 carries and look really dynamic. First of all, Jaylen Warren takes a lot more than 6 carries a game.
Yes.
But also, he finished 34th in the league in scrimmage yards last year. I mean, he was ahead of guys like Devontae Adams, Jerome Ford, Deebo Samuel, Josh Jacobs, DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Smith, Austin Eckler. He put up more yards than Austin Eckler. Yeah. And you look at the top 40 of, guys who gained scrimmage yards this year. Jaylen Warren, the only one who didn't start a game, in the top 40, and he was in the top 40 in scrimmage yards. This idea that every team has Jaylen Warren is simply not true. He was 4th in the league in yards per carry. At some point, that stuff just isn't to treat it as if it's like a fluke. Yep. That Jaylen Warren was productive is pretty ridiculous to me. I don't know what other team has a Jaylen Warren. No. I mean, I think the closest thing you get is Detroit with Gibbs and Montgomery. But even then, I don't that's not every team. That's one team.
It's one team.
It's right. It's I don't know. I think that's kind of a lazy take. I think it's someone who hasn't looked at the Steelers that closely, which is fine. There are only so many games you can watch in a given week, but you just got to look at the numbers. This isn't a fluke. This isn't, this is who Jaylen Warren is, man. He's explosive, and he's gotten plenty of touches and plenty of opportunities to prove it. So, that on top of the saying that Najee is average thing, that really rubbed me the wrong way. Cause I don't think that's someone who's watched the Steelers with any kind of a watchful eye over the past couple of years, or especially last year.
Here's what I want to talk about next. Size matters. We all know it, and it's important to remember it in times of need. I recently went to a small law firm in hopes of getting the compensation I felt I deserved. I didn't, and to this day, I still think about the money that I may have missed out on. I filled out mounds of paperwork, then waited around for what felt like forever, got phone call after phone call telling me what I did not do right in the process, and it was expensive. all to get underwhelming compensation and almost zero satisfaction. Fortunately, if you ever get seriously injured and want to file a claim, you don't have to go through the same hassle I did. Instead, you can make it way easier by finding out if you have a claim in just a few clicks on your phone and working with America's biggest injury law firm with the promise of being for the people. Here comes Morgan & Morgan, today's sponsor. Morgan & Morgan has over 1,000 attorneys working in all 50 states fighting to get their clients the money they deserve. In recent months, they've achieved verdicts for their clients, including one that is worth $26 million. That is 40 times the highest insurance offer. And they're absolutely free unless you win. I got lowballed. Don't make the same mistake I did. Fighting big companies takes a big firm. And with America's biggest injury law firm, you're ready to take on insurance companies of any size. Don't overthink it. You can start your claim in just a few clicks by following the link in our description or by going to www.forthepeople.com/allsteelers. It only takes a few minutes to find out if you have a case. And if you have, it might be worth millions. No chance. So the Najee Harris thing, I think, like, I get it. If you didn't watch every snap of Pittsburgh Steelers football in 2023, you could come away with the opinion of Najee Harris is a little overrated, and he didn't have the success that I think guys are, and people are trying to make him something that he is. If you actually watch the games, you realize just how crucial Najee Harris was down the stretch. And don't get me wrong, like first half of the season, Najee Harris, and second half of the season, Najee Harris. Second half of the season, Najee Harris was much better than first half of the season, Najee Harris. But still, it was when the Steelers needed a running game, when they needed a strong offense, when they had any bit of a passing game whatsoever, Najee Harris came to life, which is, all you could ask for, really. Jaylen Warren's been a monster. And, that's just a guy that anybody who really watches the Pittsburgh Steelers, you would make a case and have a pretty strong case that Jaylen Warren could probably start on a good chunk of teams in the NFL. And the fact that the Pittsburgh Steelers have him as a number 2 it's not a fluke. It is a fluke. It's a fluke that they got lucky enough to get a Jaylen Warren as an undrafted guy out of Oklahoma State. That shouldn't have happened. You look at who Jaylen Warren is and what Jaylen Warren does. Not every team has a Jaylen Warren. You could look at the production and say, yeah, he's a great runner. He could catch the football out of the backfield. Just go look at his runs. Go look at the times that he takes it 60 yards to the house. Go look at the times where he's jumping over guys. Go look at the times where he turns a 4-yard run into a 9-yard run because he breaks 3 tackles and spins out of somebody. And go look at the drives where he's the only running back out there for a whole drive and looks damn good as the only running back out there for a whole drive. Go look at the times where he lays people out as a blocker. Like, what Jaylen Warren does is not, oh man, Jaylen Warren, you can find Jaylen Warren everywhere. Nah, I don't think that's the case. I don't think there are Jaylen Warrens on other teams. I think that you could look at, like, the Cincinnati Bengals are the first team that came to mind for me. You look at the Cincinnati Bengals, and Zach Moss, cool. I hope he does well. I'm always pro player. He's not Jaylen Warren. They'd take Jaylen Warren over Zach Moss any day of the week. I don't think there's 32 Jaylen Warrens out there. I don't think there's 10. And the fact that the Steelers have 2 of them, Jaylen Warren would be a starter if Najee Harris wasn't a first-round pick. And that's not a knock on Najee Harris. Najee Harris is a first-round pick, and he's worthy of being a first-round pick. But if the Steelers didn't have Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren would be the guy, 0 questions asked.
Yeah, there are Jaylen Warrens elsewhere in the league. Like, there's guys who are similar in production and play similar styles. The thing is, those guys are usually starters in the NFL. Like, they're not riding the bench behind Najee. Like, teams have Jaylen Warrens. They don't have teams have Najee Harris's. They don't have both of them at the same time, and that's what makes the Steelers really unique. Especially, like you alluded to, this is just going to be who they are. Like, this is the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're going to run the ball all over the field this year, and it's because they have 2 great running backs. They found an offensive coordinator that fit their personnel, and their personnel leans towards the run because they have 2 great running backs.
Exactly. This was all by design. They knew what they were getting into. To say that there's no weapons, I understand when you're talking about the passing game and, only having George Pickens and Pat Fryermuth, but there are a lot of teams out there that have less than George Pickens and Pat Fryermuth and still have an opportunity to add to it because the rest of their offense is good. And most times, I mean, you could look at Tennessee for a long time. People talked about, nobody was sitting around saying Tennessee's offense is terrible. They would say Tennessee's offense is built around Derrick Henry. The Steelers' offense is built around Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, and I think that's okay. And I think everybody who knows what the Steelers are going to do this season realizes that that's a good place to be for anybody in Pittsburgh. So, Nick, I mean, I'm sorry, but sometimes you just don't have good comments, and this time, I think a really, really poor take by Nick Wright.